Good morning and welcome to this episode of Chet Chats. We are sitting here on the back porch, just taking in the views of the Blue Ridge Mountains. It's a very nice Sunday morning. I thought I would do a breakdown of the video that's circulating right now regarding there's a Caucasian couple, female who's 32, husband's 42. They got into an incident in a parking lot of a Chipotle with an African-American family. I believe it was a grown woman, and then I think it was her 15-year-old daughter. At least she said she was 15. The video shows argument, and ultimately the Caucasian female pulled a handgun on the other two, and she has since been charged with felonious assault. I believe, for those of you who haven't seen the video, and please feel free to watch it, draw your own conclusions about the facts, but I believe a pretty fair summary of the facts, at least that are essentially undisputed, is something happened in or outside the Chipotle, and the African-American woman was demanding an apology for the Caucasian female bumping into her 15-year-old daughter. That's at least what is indicated on the video. The Caucasian lady is in her car. The other lady is, and her daughter is yelling at them. The Caucasian lady says, look, I'm very sorry that you're responding this way. The African-American lady calls the white lady a racist. The white lady says you can't just go around calling people a racist. The Caucasian lady and her husband are trying to leave, trying to remove themselves from the situation. And the other folks are, continuing to yell, continuing to sort of antagonize. It appears that at one point in time, the African-American lady stands behind the vehicle so that the folks can't pull away without hitting her. At this point in time, the Caucasian lady gets out of the car, pulls a handgun, and says, get away, get the F away, that sort of thing. And, and then ultimately they leave, and, situation goes from there. Ultimately, they are charged. The Caucasian female, at least, is charged with felonious assault for pointing a firearm. But like I said, watch the video, draw your own conclusions about the facts. I'm not trying to slant the facts, or I'm trying to remember exactly what I remember from the video, just from a purely factual standpoint. But please feel free to watch the video and draw your own conclusions on the facts. So there's a petition going around to drop the charges against the woman for pointing the gun, and there's a lot of people that are like, I can't believe that this lady is being charged. I will say, and like I said, watch the video. But it does appear that the African-American couple a woman and her teenage daughter are refusing to let this situation die, and the woman, the defendant in this case, who's been charged, the Caucasian lady, and her husband are trying to remove themselves from the situation, are trying to de-escalate, up until the point where the defendant then pulls the handgun. So the question has been posed: is she not justified in defending herself? Is she, and there's also, and I don't know if this is true or not, but there are a few websites that are saying that she was pregnant. The defendant's pregnant, and you can even see her covering her stomach during this altercation. Almost, something that's consistent with what a pregnant woman would do to instinctively, protect her unborn child during this, what appears to be a potentially violent encounter. So we get into the law of self-defense and deadly force. So the first thing let's do is let's talk about whether something constitutes deadly force or not. And I know I've sort of touched on this on other videos, but I don't think I have many subscribers, so you probably haven't seen the other videos. But deadly force is using that force which is likely to cause death or serious bodily injury. And this incident happened in Michigan. I did read the Michigan statute on self-defense. So Michigan says, just like most states do, this is pretty much consistent across the board, but using deadly force or threatening to use deadly force. So pointing a gun at someone, in a manner to cause them to fear the imminent use of that weapon does constitute deadly force. This is different than just holding a weapon, like we saw in that, in the situation with the couple in their front lawn, where the husband was holding an AR, just holding a weapon or having a weapon holstered or something like that. Having a weapon on you does not mean that you're threatening deadly force. But if you pull out the gun, point it at someone, in a shooting stance, and using either an isosceles shooting stance or a Weaver stance, obviously indicating that you are intent on potentially firing the weapon, that is the use of deadly force. So this takes this analysis from, okay, was she justified in using deadly force as opposed to using non-deadly force? Because the standard is different, okay? So under Michigan law, and I'm not a licensed attorney in Michigan, so this is not legal advice, but you're justified in using deadly force if you have a reasonable fear of imminent death or serious bodily injury, either to yourself or someone else. So the question becomes, did that lady reasonably fear death or serious bodily injury? And we saw in the video that the ladies were, screaming at her, calling her names, all this kind of stuff. But we didn't see any type of physical assault. We didn't see a threatened assault. They were obviously trying to instigate something. And it seemed like they were trying to goat her into a physical altercation. But from what I saw, it seemed to be all words. Now, I will say this. So I'll cut to the chase in my conclusion, and then I'll back up and I'll explain how I got there. I don't think this lady was justified in using deadly force, i.e., pointing a handgun at this lady. I think she would have been justified in using non-deadly force, to prevent this. Because this lady did, she got in her face. And the big issue was she was preventing her and her husband from leaving. They got into the car, and this lady stood behind the vehicle and seemingly was blocking them in. They had nowhere to go. I think she would have been justified in simply, slowly and carefully backing out her car and driving away. And that's a big reason why, I don't know that a jury would find her justified in using deadly force, because, there was a very safe alternative. They were in their car. They could have simply backed out. And if the car had bumped into the lady in the process of pulling out, well, that would have obviously been seen as necessary, because that's what they had to do to remove themselves from the situation. I will note that when I was reading Michigan law, Michigan seemed to have no duty to retreat. But that's not really necessary to this analysis, because in watching the video, I didn't really see any situation that rises to the level of threatening the defendant with death or serious bodily injury or sexual assault. One interesting thing was there is a presumption under Michigan law that you are in fear of death or serious bodily injury in one of several circumstances, and one is that someone is trying to be forcibly removed from an occupied vehicle. So that's about as close as we get to a possible justification for this lady, is that did she fear that these people that were yelling and instigating were ultimately trying to pull her or her husband out of the car to fight them? If you can successfully argue that she was in reasonable fear that she was going to be pulled out of her occupied vehicle, then she enjoys a presumption that she was acting appropriately. However, this presumption, like almost all other presumptions in the law, are what's called a rebuttable presumption, which means the prosecution could offer facts to say, you know what, even though we are going to assume initially that you had the right to use deadly force, we can see through the plain facts, and we can see through the video, and we can see through totality of the circumstances that you were never in fear of death, serious bodily injury, or sexual assault. So do I think that this lady could have gotten out, pushed the woman away, punched her in the face, kicked her in the stomach, to try to get her away and to try to be able to remove herself? Yes, because that would not be considered deadly force, and that would be under a different standard. Standard of just, was she under fear of non-deadly force herself? And I think a reasonable person would have been in fear that this group was going to strike, slap, assault, push them. But the folks never brandished any kind of weapon. I didn't see anything that seemed to rise to the level of deadly force. So, and I'll be interested in any comments, any facts that maybe I've overlooked. I understand the defendant's frustration in this case. I understand feeling like, you know what, she tried to de-escalate. She tried to remove herself from the situation, but the other folks just were insisting on an altercation. But, whether we agree or not, we live in a country where, sticks and stones may break my bones, but words can never hurt me. You're supposed to walk away if someone is attacking you with just words. And that seemed to be what it was in this case. So as much as I empathize and understand the frustration of, her feeling like, she's being called a racist, for presumably no reason, and goaded and instigated and just, being treated very poorly, I can't say that I saw that moment in time where I say, okay, at that point in time, now deadly force is justified. So